first, thank you very much for having me. I'm really, really pleased to be here. I've seen some old friends and colleagues here that I haven't seen in a long time, and meeting new ones. I have had the privilege of working on this for quite a while with some wonderful people. So I'm going to share with you here some material that we've been working on for about 10 years now, as well as some thoughts of my own to carry it forward, which I've not talked about before in this kind of detail. So I thought this was a great place to unveil this and see what happens to it. So in this talk, first of all, I'm going to talk about apartheid. Some of you may be aware that I did a study with Richard Falk, who would be wonderful if he were able to be here, where we co-authored a study for the United Nations on this question. And that report is what I usually talk about, and I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to kind of rush through that because I want to get on to the implications of the report. So I'll go over the legal definitions of the report and the how Israel's apartheid regime works briefly in order to establish that, and if you have questions about that, we can come back to it later. The key point from that material is that Israel's, the finding that I've come to after looking at it for a long time, is that Israel's apartheid regime requires occupation of the occupied territories, West Bank and Gaza. And I'll flesh that out as we go through this. So under the implications, I'm proposing that when we take the apartheid model as our way of understanding this conflict, and I appreciate the politics of the word conflict, but forgive me for blundering into that, we find three radical changes in how we might understand the conflict as a complete picture, its origin, its character, and so forth. One of them, and I'm going to be playing back and forth between political science, which is my field, and international law, which is a field I'm trying to get more familiar with. But one thing about apartheid is that it's a crime against humanity. Right? It is illegal. You can't do that. Right? So if you find that a state is practicing apartheid, the entire international community inherits an obligation to stop it. Doesn't matter whether you've signed on to anything or not. It's a universal prohibition. Therefore, no solution in Palestine that perpetuates apartheid is legal. The second one is that apartheid is sustained by partition, and here I am talking about the two-state solution briefly in order to lay it to rest, I hope, if Israel remains an apartheid state. So if we are talking about partition that sustains Israel in its current configuration, we're talking about perpetuating apartheid in that one of the two states. Therefore, partition into two states, which would sustain an apartheid regime, is illegal. This rather blew me away when I ran across it. The third is that ending apartheid requires rethinking the state itself, the actors we're concerned about. Right now, the dominant legal paradigm is belligerent occupation. Israel is occupying territory. It has to give it up. But the apartheid finding moves us into a different position, gives us a different lens to look at the whole thing. And that brings us to consider that all of Mandate Palestine is the state we should be thinking about, and that it is that state that has been wrongfully divided by a racial doctrine. And I'm drawing that language directly from South Africa at this point. This analysis is based on three general sources. One is a book I wrote a long time ago, The One-State Solution. Wrote that back in, actually I wrote the gist of it in 2003, so you can get the whole thing for free from the London Review of Books. But I thought in 2005 that when this came out that everybody understood the two-state solution was dead, and I was rushing it into press so that I wouldn't be scooped by somebody else, and here we are standing here so much later still saying, the two-state solution may be dead. And, oh God, man, what does it take, right? So the main thing from that book is that Israel will not withdraw. It's an analysis of why Israel will not withdraw from the occupied territories, and that means that we are confronting a one-state rather than a two-state solution. The second source is, for the lawyers in the room, the main source for the law. It's a dense legal study composed by a team of lawyers that I had the privilege of coordinating. So if you're concerned about the true legal, deeper analysis, this is your source. And finally, the report that Richard Falk and I produced for the United Nations Economic and Social Council for West Asia, for West Asia, last March, which hit the headlines and made quite the splash. But that was the study where we determined that Israel is practicing apartheid in regard to the entire Palestinian people. I'm so glad you mentioned the Inside 48 population, including the refugees. And that study is available online. You just Google it and it'll come up, even though it's not on the UN website anymore. So those are your sources for background of what I'm going to rush through now. Now, basically, when we're talking about apartheid in Israel, there's been a lot of language about that: apartheid wall, apartheid roads. But if we're going to actually charge Israel with the crime of apartheid, we have to get serious about using the international law for that. And there are two sources which define apartheid. One of them is the International Convention for the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. I've got the introductory paragraph here. I just want to point out a few things. That it involves similar practices to those of South Africa, but not identical, which means that if it's different from South Africa, it doesn't make any difference. That these practices and policies are for the purpose of maintaining domination by one group, one racial group over another. I call that the purpose clause. You have to actually want to dominate. It can't just be accidental. And that it is a system rather than discrete actions. And this is the main finding I'd like to stress for you, that apartheid is a comprehensive system. It's not a list of different things: the wall, the settlements, the house demolitions, the prisoners. Treating those as discrete issues loses the big picture. Big picture is a larger project, a larger system of apartheid. The second instrument is the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which is what Israel is very nervous about right now. And the Trump administration has, if you can call it that, has decided to ban by denouncing the court itself, rather than let the court weigh in on several things, possibly including the question of apartheid, although that hasn't been mentioned explicitly yet. But the thing I want to stress here is that this definition also mentions regime. That this is a whole system, not just discrete acts. All these definitions are satisfied in the case of Israel. And this is what I'm not going to go into because it's all in the other material. Regime, yes, we find a comprehensive system applied to Palestinians wherever they live. It has a racial character. This is often very controversial because we don't consider Palestinians and Jews to be races today. We don't use that word. But in international law, racial discrimination is based on several ideas, several identity concepts. You can read them up there: race, color, descent, national or ethnic origin. And in Israeli law and doctrine, Jews are a descent group. That is the claim they make on the land and for self-determination, sharing one ethnic national origin. So it is Israeli law and doctrine that fits this definition of racial identity. The purpose clause is satisfied all over the place. A few examples. That the basic law of Israel includes several references to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. The law of return is clearly discriminatory in providing for automatic entrance by Jews and no comparable privilege by Palestinians, who are actually, of course, excluded. The Jewish national organizations, Jewish National Fund, Jewish Agency, World Zionist Organization, which are by law charged with administering whole sections of Israeli society for the Jewish people. And, of course, the nation-state law, which I think was just frosting on the cake, really. I mean, it was all there before. It's just that now everybody can see it. The definitions go on. I'm not sharing this with you because we don't have time to list a whole ream of practices. All of those practices are satisfied, with the exception of a genocide clause. That didn't apply in South Africa either. It seems to have been put into the definition by someone who was concerned about that. But one of the things I wanted to highlight here is, this not in the presentation, it came up while I was listening to the other presentations. One of them is a crime of apartheid, an inhuman act of apartheid, is to punish the resistance to apartheid. Article 2F. So all these things we see about, the Border Patrol is in that territory, they have authority to control Palestinians, but not to touch settlers. This is all fitting that legal provision, that it is illegal to resist the system itself. A lot of people arguing against this analysis mention the condition of Palestinian citizens of Israel who have the right to vote, and I chose that particular argument to illustrate how the whole system works. The apartheid system in Israel consists of separate domains of law applied geographically to the populations in those areas. The first one is Palestinian citizens of Israel. It could go in any order, but this is the order we used. Palestinian citizens have the right to vote, but they don't have the right to vote against Jewish domination of the state. Analogy there that I sometimes use would be what would happen if we simply reformed slavery and we provided slaves with wages and good housing and health care and things like that, and even the vote, but not the vote to end slavery. Okay, it means that they're perpetually under a system of domination, although they technically have this right, and it's ineffectual. Domain 2 would be Palestinian residents of Jerusalem who have voting rights in the municipality, but not in the country. They also have insecure residency, and the place they go if they lose it is the occupied territories. Well, unless they can get out somehow. The third domain is Palestinians in the territories, the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. Obviously, they don't have Israeli citizenship, therefore they cannot vote. This is where we find the occupation absolutely vital for Israel. As long as Israel can hold those territories under military occupation, it is not under legal pressure to make these people citizens, and it can get away with this. Billions of people disenfranchised from the government that has unassailable and unquestioned and uncontested control over their lives. And finally, the fourth domain is Palestinian refugees. Pretty simple domain. You just simply do not allow them back in. They have no rights to return or family unification or anything else. This is another way of understanding the system, that it is an interactive system in which all of the laws operate together in a complementary fashion in order to secure one thing, which is the Purpose Clause, to maintain Jewish national domination of the state over any other group, specifically in this case targeting the indigenous people of the land, Palestinian people. If you want to come back to that later in questions, I'd be happy to do it, but I'm going to race right on. Implications, all right. Now let's say that I've spent 10 more minutes throwing up stuff on the board and you're all convinced that it's apartheid. I really think if you read the material, you will be convinced it's apartheid. I'm pretty well convinced it's apartheid, and I'm more than that. I think this is the ticket to understanding a great deal about the conflict that hasn't made sense before. One of the things that it helps make sense of is why we haven't been able to end the occupation. The standard way is for Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories. This was the Oslo premise, the staged process which never happened. The problem with that is that Israel considers apartheid an existential imperative. It will, and I'll come to that in a sec. But the point is it will not withdraw. It cannot withdraw, and evidence is overwhelmingly against it, and I agree, let us not even go there anymore. I wrote about this in the one-state solution. You can read my thoughts on that from that if you like. The second one is to declare a state of Palestine to leverage Israel's withdrawal. This has gotten a lot of attention. A lot of people put a lot of activism into getting this done. It sounds good, it feels good. And it can give legal leverage regarding the International Criminal Court, perhaps, and other things which could look very promising. The problem is that this would generate a Bantustan state because Israel's apartheid system requires one. To preserve apartheid, Israel must prevent miscegenation, the mixing of the groups. This is a universal problem for all racial democracies. If you're going to have a democracy, you have to have racial separation. South Africa, white Australia, anywhere. Therefore, Israel must control movement and borders to prevent mixing. It's pretty straightforward logic, right? And that would violate the basic sovereign needs of a Palestinian state. If Israel continues to control its borders and all passage in and out of it and all trade in and out of it, then it is not a sovereign state. It's more like Gaza. Israel cannot accept a Palestinian state that is not a Bantustan because the Bantustan would threaten apartheid. And apartheid is a threat to international peace and security as well as a morally abhorrent practice, and therefore it is not a solution either to the violence and insecurity of the region or to international law or to the moral imperatives we've heard some people stressing today. Just like to spend another minute or two on the Bantustans themselves, because the more I look at the Bantustans, the more they make sense of a lot of what we're talking about here, and I really hope you will take a few minutes later to look this up for yourselves. Again, the absolute imperative of apartheid, which is Afrikaans for separation. There is no difference between apartheid and Hafrada. They mean exactly the same thing. The system in South Africa is in the top map there. You see it, the Bantustans were all broken up. That's one Bantustan. KwaZulu-Natal, it's all broken up with exclusively white zones in between. Same thing in Oslo. And I must stress here, Israel and South Africa were best buddies for decades. The heads of state were flying back and forth, chumming it up with each other. And I was told by people in South Africa that every time Ariel Sharon went to South Africa, where I lived for 6 years and did a whole study there, every time Ariel Sharon went to South Africa, he asked about the Bantustans. Okay, so he was absorbing, they were thinking it through, and also trying to avoid some of the pitfalls. The logic of the Bantustans to create this separation effect is to channel indigenous political ambitions away from the dominant state, the apartheid state, to the local authorities, the indigenous authorities. In South Africa, they were called, guess what? Black self-government authorities. Right. And we took the name. This is a picture of all the Bantustan leaders lined up in South Africa. There's therefore a leadership that is motivated to cooperate with the apartheid system, because otherwise it would not be allowed to remain in power. And we see the PA playing that role. And that leadership is compelled to repress indigenous dissent, Article 2F, right? You have to repress resistance to the system, and that's a conditionality for them staying in power. The Apartheid Convention absolutely rejects all of this. It rejects dividing people on the basis of race, and it lists racial reserves, which is the AB areas of Oslo, among the inhuman acts of apartheid, and insists on territorial integrity. The Oslo Accords established the ABC areas in terms nearly identical to the Bantustan constitutions. If you put those constitutions on one side of your screen and the Oslo Accords on the other, you find it just bam, 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 same phrasing, same conditions, same arrangements for limited autonomy. So the Palestinian Self-Government Authority, like the Black Self-Government Authority, is in fact not just happenstance like a Bantustan. This is not an analogy, this is a design. This is the nature of the state. So what do we do with this? Okay, we are dealing with a full-fledged case of apartheid here with a Bantustan strategy to deal with the unwanted group. And here's where I lean out into the wind and wait for your reactions. The conflict, in my view, once you accept this analysis, come back to this idea that Israel and the creation of Israel as an apartheid state wrongfully divided Mandate Palestine. This gets into the very touchy area of the very legitimacy of the state of Israel, which is where we're a no-go area. We're not supposed to go there, but this is where this takes us. Advanced settler colonialism, and we have cases of that all over the place, including the United States and Canada and Latin America and all over the place. All of these cases are not ended by racial reserves. Although we have Indian reservations and so forth, they don't work well, and the reason they don't is structural. I won't get into that. But we have the solution that the international community has accepted is not withdrawal. Once settler colonialism reaches a certain tipping point, it is not going to turn back. It's gone too far, right? The United States population is not going to get up and leave it the 1% Native American people. That's not going to happen, right? When was that tipping point? Hard to say. In Israel, I think we need to accept that that tipping point is long past. That population is not going to leave, just as it was not going to leave in South Africa. The way you end settler colonialism is not by withdrawal, but by eliminating settler domination and racial discrimination. This is the pattern. This has been the solution all over the world. Therefore, what has been treated as belligerent occupation is actually, in this view, if we take Mandate Palestine as the country we reference, an ongoing incomplete process of partition that is wholly illegal in this setting. That's why the two-state solution is illegal, because it is partitioning the country on the basis of a racial doctrine. Therefore, the imperative of non-racial equality should substitute for the prohibition on acquiring territory by force, which for those of you in the room who know international humanitarian law, that's the big worry. You're not supposed to be able to get territory by war, but in this case, if we shift our lens, we find settler colonial condition. This is the way out. I'm putting this in because every time I hear binational, I hear Bantustan. Okay, and this is a very difficult topic that Omar and I have been talking about nonstop since we met each other this morning. But the Palestinian nationalism has got a task on its hands if it's going to be unification, right? To make sense of this, what South Africans called colonialism of a special type, where you have this massive settler society that is not going away. How do you adjust the national identity discourse to suit that state-building and nation-building imperative? Very challenging, but I think it can be done. It's been done. It was done by the South Africans, and if it was done by them, hell, Palestinians could sure do it. Rethink the whole territory as one state that belongs to all who live in it, which is the phrasing of the South African Freedom Charter. I just close with a little quote by Olmert that leading Palestinians, I won't read it to you because you can read it for yourselves, but leading Israelis have spotted this problem. The last line here, that if Palestinians adopt an anti-apartheid struggle toward this situation, it will mean the end of the Jewish state. And that's what Israel is most afraid of. They're most afraid of an anti-apartheid struggle because it would delegitimize what they're doing. I am out of time. I'm being leveraged, so I do have a lot more here, which I didn't figure I'd have time for, so I'm quite glad that I realized I didn't. I'll just say thank you very much.